Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Jordan White, the Baltimore HIV Collaboratory Coordinator here at the Johns Hopkins Center for AIDS Research. And today we have with us a special guest speaker, Ms. Ava Pipitone, who is the founder and CEO of Host Home. Previously, Ava was the co-owner of Red Emma's Cooperative here in Baltimore and a founder of the director of the Baltimore Transgender Alliance, where she had firsthand experience working with LGBT housing and inequality issues in Baltimore City. Without any further ado, I would like to welcome Ms. Ava Pipitone to the podium. Thank you, Ava. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Yeah, good to see you.
And if we could hold any questions to the end today.
So hello to everybody who is on the live stream today, and thanks for tuning in, and thank you for everybody who's here in person. As Jordan mentioned, I'm the CEO of Host Home, and let's get started. So for those who haven't heard of Host Home, we build software for homeless services, and specifically, we are building a more efficient and inclusive homeless services here in Baltimore and nationally. For those who work in this sector, you already know, homeless people go without beds because agencies cannot locate them. It's very clear. Beyond not being able to look up new beds or bring them into the system, there's actually no way to match people with any bed in a home sharing program. So the home sharing programs that exist are doing so without the support of their software. In this space, there are 23 legacy software vendors, and they are not optimized to support the home sharing programs that are vital for communities like mine. This creates not only staffing limitations, but also incompatibility between the legacy platforms. And what's more, our numbers are inaccurate. We all know that in the springtime, we do a point-in-time count here in Baltimore City. It took the whole month. And we know there is a 52% bed supply deficit to an increasing homeless population. We also know we are not counting everybody. With Host Home's tools in operation, we can have much more accurate numbers. It's simple. We can house more guests and increase the revenue for the suppliers. We can integrate in with those existing platforms, and you don't have an instruction manual for your iPhone. The other day I was at lunch and I saw the training manual for Baltimore City's system for managing their clients in the shelter. And the manual was expanding like this. And I know it was a 4-day training that worker was going through. We can do better. And in doing better, we can improve the efficiency of these systems. We can plug into these legacy software vendors and then automate that host-to-guest matching process. It works simply. A user, a guest, is experiencing or about to experience housing instability. They contact their shelter. They qualify, instead of the waiting list, 14 days or longer for the shelter, they might qualify for the home sharing program, where they are then matched and then arrive on site at a host location, where now, with our software for the first time, they'll be supported with HIPAA-compliant messaging and other integrations. The business model is straightforward. Host Home can leverage those existing vendors. There are 23 software vendors in this space. We can have strategic partnership with each one and thereby access their entire client base. That's every shelter in the country. Thinking about this, if you're a director of a housing nonprofit or housing service agency, your costs for worker burnout and other factors you consider when choosing to bring on more staff or how to deal with the turnover, we can address these with better tools for those workers. For those business folks in the room, right now all of our costs are going to acquiring our first customer. However, when we do so, we'll have $180,000 recurring revenue. That is the secret here. There are high switching costs in this space, and once we get clients through the legacy platforms, they stay with us for 6 years or more. Again, this is a $12 billion market. And if we take 2% of that, we're looking at there's $1.2 billion going into the 23 vendors. If we can get 2% of that, that's $24 million. That will be our slice of the pie. And we can unlock that market by partnering strategically with 3 of those vendors. Once we have that install base, we can grow. We are in talks with Baltimore City. I've met with the director of homeless services, and they're very interested in the product. We are in talks with Maryland State Department of Housing and Community Development, and they're inviting us in for further talks with their board. It's a longer sales cycle. People are familiar with B2G. I believe it stands for business to glacier and not business to government, but that's another conversation. Underneath all of this, what is this product, Ava? Specifically, we have host profiles, review system, and automated matching software. Let's break that down a little bit, and I promise I won't take too long. This is the first time we'll have a user-facing application in homeless services. As it stands currently, guests trust their social worker or case manager with a clipboard, determining how much the social cost of housing and rehabilitating them will be. They have no power. Inversely, in platforms like hotel rental marketplaces such as Airbnb, because you can pay money, you have the Wi-Fi password, key to the front door, and a towel. We are blurring those power dynamics and bringing them where they should be, putting power in people accessing homeless services. So a guest can see this. For the first time ever, they can message their case manager with HIPAA-compliant messaging. They'll also be able to message their host. Just like you log in to your doctor through the patient portal, the technology already exists and we can integrate it into the host home platform. Everyone is reviewed on the system, hosts and guests. We can break down the language, but I like to zoom in on celebration. This word is to address the disparity between the host and guest that we experienced in the pilots. And we're giving feedback to people who are celebrating the successes of others instead of coveting them. And again, the reviews that hosts receive are available to other people in the ecosystem. So now, what if you could review your shelter and that review affected their funding? Again, we're talking about power in homeless services. Inversely, those reviews the guests receive are for them and their social worker. They're not meant to be public. The idea is we're not disposing of anybody who unconsciously or unintentionally has a bad experience. Here is the screen that guests will see once they've qualified with their social worker and have qualified for the home sharing program. They can search by whatever qualifications they choose and be placed in an off-site bed. And just a quick word about the potential of this. Homelessness is a euphemism for isolation, right? You're not just isolated from your peers and your community, you're isolated from yourself. So the aspects, the features we want to integrate are things like Uper, it's a mental health integration. The Connector app, piloted by Paolo Gregory, gamifies this journey to employment and housing stability. We can integrate these directly into the interface. So here, if you look closely, you'll see that there's a bot talking to the guest. The main thing that the social workers do inside the shelter is they check in with their guests. They ask how you're doing, what'd you eat today, what are your goals for tomorrow? Since you're off-site at a host home or a home sharing location, we can replicate that with our tools. For those people who are into tech and want to learn a little bit more about what automation looks like, essentially we have an inverse relationship, this ranked search recommendation engine. We have an inverse relationship between the highest ranked hosts will be placed with the higher need guests. Inversely, those new hosts will see guests that have relatively lower need according to the intake process. The second part here is talking about the free response, the describe yourself section. And we now have natural language processing, which can generate points for matching between hosts and guests by processing the natural language that you fill in. It's really advanced technology. We're working with Pyrite AI. And again, these are the minds we need in our homeless services sector, brains like this. So far, Missy and I are the core team. We have some advisors in the room now. And I think it's notable that Blair Franklin is the executive director of the Yes Center, who we plan to work with for our pilot program. They currently facilitate a host home program with St. Ambrose Housing Aid, Star Trek, and the Yes Center. And they are prime community partner for our Alpha pilot. We've been at this for a while. We were at the Social Innovation Lab back in 2018. I'm currently with OSI as a fellow here in Baltimore. And I was invited to give a TED Talk on the model this past April down in DC at the Shakespeare Theater. And we're currently in Conscious Venture Labs, which is how to grow these types of businesses while maintaining focus on your values. Which tolerances matter as you grow. And again, once homeless services is operating in this way, these tools are not limited to just this space. And I'd love to talk more about that. To actually get off the ground here in Baltimore, once we have our contracts with the city, we'll be finishing this product development process. And once we launch our pilot, we'll need the $400,000 to sustain that with 3 other community organizations. And I'd be happy to talk with anyone in the room about that process. I want to say thank you for the Center of AIDS Research for having us here today, and would love to talk more about how you can partner to bring inclusive and efficient homeless services to the city of Baltimore and housing and urban development nationally. Thank you. So I want to take some questions because I feel like there might be a curiosity about how the tech actually works amongst the model more broadly. So Jordan can help with that. And anything you all have, I'm happy to go. I know I went kind of quickly, just looking at the attendance. I wanted to make sure we were moving. I'm happy to zoom in wherever you all like. Hey, Andrew.
Hey, that was a great talk, and I apologize. Oh, thank you for walking in a few minutes late. And you actually might have answered this before I walked in. Mm-hmm. There was one section where you focused on the app, and you were talking about some of the reviewer feedback, and you had referenced some of your earlier work, and it was that celebration piece where you talked about the dynamics between the host and the guest. And I was just wondering if you could expand on that and sort of your past experiences thus far with this. And I think it's really nice to see that the app is really building on that past experience, but I'm curious just to hear kind of a bit more about the initial findings.
Yeah, so 2017 fall, we ran a concept pilot, discovering what works in this model. We quickly learned that we weren't the only ones operating in this way, and there were actually, at that time, 3 other home sharing programs in the country. The following year, there were 11, and the following after that, there were 24. So home sharing in the LGBTQ space is growing, right? And we also found that survivors of domestic violence and returning citizens and veterans all have home sharing as their intervention. They're called shelter-averse populations, and they don't benefit from group housing. They benefit from one-to-one tailored care. So we learned a lot about the space, for starters, when we began our concept pilot. But to these points specifically, if you're experiencing housing insecurity and you're in a space with someone who has affluence and has an extra bedroom, you're going to assume that there's some differences. And we want to center on this cultural exchange. We're building friendships between hosts and guests. So we found the way to point to that was to not only create a lexicon that everyone is talking with a shared language in the ecosystem of the app. If you go into Celebration, you'll also see the nonprofits in the space where you can address these issues. So I don't have a slide on this here, but we have a map for integrating service nonprofits. And it's part of an integration with the Connector app through Paolo's project. And they map services for employment, legal, housing for the guests to have access to. And if you have a low score on celebration or a low score on flexibility, you can click on that and you'll see not only definitions for what does flexibility mean, and then they can float or sync those definitions, much like Reddit does, but you can also see where you can go to level up your score or improve your score or deepen your knowledge of what we mean by that. Does that answer your question a little bit? Yeah. Yeah. Carlton.
Thank you for your presentation. I'm really concerned about elder care, and especially those who are isolated and not involved. And that how does your equipment help them and or teach them to be in such a group home and also to beware of squatters,
Sure.
and so that they don't or anyone be attacked, but just lay upon them and everything. So
Great.
if you can
Great.
just talk about
Yeah.
that
Great.
for a moment.
Thanks, Carlton, for that question. First, I want to say we build the tools to make home sharing more effective and to grow and support the existing home sharing programs. We don't run the home sharing programs ourselves. Our clients do, and we support their crucial work, right? And by building these tools, we're going to make it easier to launch home sharing programs and make them more normative for mainstream homeless services or the norm, but we're designing them for the margins, right? We're designing them to be trans inclusive, LGBT inclusive, sensitive to survivors of domestic violence. And that's really crucial in the design, but we are serving the entire homeless services ecosystem. Wanted to first make that point. Second, with elders, we're not building anything new here. We're actually borrowing from overseas where elder care is home sharing based, right? And they find that having an elder match with a younger person it's a very synergistic housing arrangement. And again, it works something similar to what foster care is like here, but they're unsupported. The current software in homeless services cannot facilitate that. As simple as matching, do you like cats or dogs? Do you sleep early? Are you an early riser? These really basic housing incompatibility, the way they get a match currently without software, they have dozens of coffee dates, phone calls, conversations, and it just goes on. And they don't have data on their matches. It's all manual. So I care about the elders too, and I think this tool can really benefit the programs that are serving them. To answer your question?
Yes. So how do they learn to get on the apps?
Oh, tech literacy. Yeah, sure.
Because that's another problem. Yes.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
Yeah. So
so how do they learn to get on the apps?
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. The beauty of Host Home is everything that happens through the app is just an enhancement or support for what the social workers already do. So if your preferred method of accessing your home sharing program is to call the nonprofit, please do that. The app is just another tool to help take some of the load off those workers who I showed on an earlier slide who are burning out, turning over, churning through because they're using pen and paper to implement these. But if you are tech averse, call them up. Yeah. Tori.
Hi, Ava.
Hey, Tori, how are you?
I also was super late, but when Carlton's question just now mentioned squatters, that is an interesting question because Maryland tenant laws are very tenant friendly, and receiving mail someplace is enough to count it as an address. And perhaps I totally missed this part. I apologize if you're repeating it. But it is a sort of interesting question because if I recall, what I remember of Host Home when I learned about it when it was brand new, the idea that people can stay for perhaps long, the amount of time isn't fixed, or is it?
So this is good, Tori. Thank you. And for clarity, we don't run home sharing programs. We build software to support them. So every home sharing program is different. I've seen some run for months, some run for a couple of days, and different populations have different things. The beauty of our tools is that the AI, we have the algorithms that can be trained to whatever your program needs are. So our software as service model, it's rinse and repeat. When we go to Baltimore and we realize that the Yes Center, St. Ambrose, and Star Trek are running a 3-month LGBTQ youth program, great, we can train our algorithm on how to have successful placement outcomes for that population. But we're also talking to the mayor of San Francisco, where they have rapid 5-day stays for people that are about to miss their rent and need a couple more days, who previously would have been using Airbnb, but now are going to have a government program to match them in a home sharing program. And they're going to have a really different need, and our algorithm is trained to that, right? And same in New York. It's very different to be unhoused or housing insecure or shelter averse in New York City than it is in Baltimore. And we can train our tools to that population and that area. Yeah, and I think this also opens up the conversation of what does shelter averse mean? And I've already mentioned our communities and talking about the statistics of violence that my community experiences in shelters. But when you take that definition, you might notice that we are all in this room shelter averse. When we experience housing insecurity, we may not think first to go to a shelter. We would think first to go to a friend because we have that trust. What Host Home is in the business of doing is patching those cracks in our homeless services, so people who don't have those friends with spare bedrooms don't fall through those cracks. And I think that those cracks exist because of the brain drain in homeless services, and this is a product that can solve that issue. And again, we can partner with every vendor in the sector. Yeah.
So, Ava, I have another question,
Yeah.
and it just came up in mind. So, you know, Ryan White is the last payer of last resort. And according to the city, there has been a list of people who are homeless due to the fact that they cannot get in. Are you currently working with, I heard you say the mayor's homeless center, but also with Baltimore City Health Department, who also, and the state, their Part B monies is to help individuals. And are you, in a way, are you going to share with them your algorithm and helping place individuals who are HIV positive, who may have various difficulties in getting in housing?
Right. Great question. And thank you for inviting other names into the room. I'm definitely open to a strategic partnership in that space. When we look at accessing a shelter, you're ranked. HUD has a ranking system to qualify you if you can stay on site or not. And even if you do qualify for services, you're on a waiting list. In Baltimore, I believe our averages were 17 days for that waiting list. Some people say it's 14. Host Home can fill in that gap for people that have a lower score who would be stuck looking for a friend, looking for a spare bedroom, or an abandoned building. Those unofficial couch surfing guests. Host Home can serve them rapidly, place them in a home sharing program to leave the shelters for people who actually have a better fit to a group housing solution. Again, shelter averse populations would include people who are HIV positive, and Host Home will be a great fit for a home sharing program for that population. Yeah, so let's talk about alpha pilots around the country. Any other questions? Or
I think we are at time today for questions. I want to thank Ava again for her great presentation on Host Home and all of her work and commitment to the well-being of people in Baltimore City, the people of Baltimore City. And this work around housing and homeless services exists at the intersection of housing and public health, and it is particularly important for people who are vulnerable or who are living with HIV. And so we want to continue elevating this wonderful work. Thank you, Ava, and thank you all for coming today. Thank you.